This is the CFL This Week.
Welcome to the CFL This Week. What an outstanding end to week 4. And of course, we've assembled an all-star cast to kind of break it down, look forward, look backward. And again, let's start off with our all-star roundtable where we do discuss the issues of the league. And as I said, looking forward and looking back. Let's start off with Brodie Lawson, a veteran of the CFL, longtime reporter, and of course with TSN. And she may know a little something about the horses as well, too, and get us all ready for that, as we said, talk about for the Queen's Plate and what's coming up a little bit later in that Canadian Triple Crown. We got to say congratulations to the like from the Hamilton Spectator, Steve Milton. 35 years of service to the Hamilton area. Congratulations. Thank you for joining us there, Steve.
Okay, great to see everybody.
And Glen Suitor, of course. I mean, we've heard the voice, we've seen the pretty face, and then we're looking for, of course, so happy to have us in our round table here from the TSN set and, of course, in the broadcast booth. Folks, let's start off right away with what's going on here. Opening game of week number 4, the Hamilton Tiger Cats get that first win. A lot of controversy going into the week about who was going to start at quarterback. Jeremiah Masoli hurting with ribs. They entered Dane Evans, who was the hero from 2019. He goes 15 to 22, 183, 2 touchdowns, no mistakes, was sacked 6 times. But I think, as he would say, most importantly, Glenn, he got the victory. What I want to know is going into Labor Day, because Masoli's injury doesn't seem serious, what are the Tiger Cats going to do?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a good problem to have if you're Coach Steinauer, because you want basically 2 quarterbacks that you can win with. Hamilton has that. You know, I think if you weren't watching the game and just looked at the numbers from Dane Evans, you would say they were pedestrian. I mean, he didn't hit 200 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, didn't throw an interception. But you mentioned the pressure that he was under, the sacks that he took. I think the Montreal D-line got after him. He had to, really manage that game well and not turn the ball over, protect it, but still make enough plays. And so I guess to answer your question, my thought is, do you really mess with the win in the short term? Because if they are 2 starters and not 1 starter and 1 backup, as Coach said coming out of camp, well, it looks like it may be Dane's turn, at least in the short term.
Steve, what did you see? Yeah, Steve, what did you see in week 3 that you didn't see in week 1 or 2?
Well, I agree with Suits. Basically, the conservative nature of hanging on to the ball, game management, I think it's a very derogatory term for the most part, but I think that's what it was in terms of making sure that that you take a sack rather than throw the ball away. Although that wasn't the option on most of those sacks. I mean, he was getting sacks, and don't forget about the tackles in the backfield too. The one that got Speedy Banks, so those were close to what would almost be sacks as well. So. This offensive line is still a work in progress, and one of the reasons I would think Suits that the original start of the first 2 games was Jeremiah Masoli, was his little better ability. They knew where they're going to have trouble with the offensive line until it gels. They've made a lot of changes there, and there's been injuries, and Van Zyle's injury is way bigger than, I don't mean it's a worse injury. It means the impact is bigger than people outside of this city would really understand. So I think his ability to sort of avoid the early sack is one of the reasons that Jeremiah Masoli was in there in the first place. I think I don't think you mess with anything here. I think you have to go with the hot hand here, and it's not a very hot hand, but it's hotter than it was in the first 2 games for either of them. So I think, you've got to give the nod to Dane this week and give him the whole week of practice at the A reps.
Brodie, you've seen both of these guys play, and of course, Masoli's had much more ability to start with the Tiger Cats. And again, do you go with the hot hand?
Yeah, I think these guys are right. Imagine that. The real veterans in the league. Yeah, of course you do. Of course you go with what's working for you at the time. And I think Glenn brings up a good point. When we belabor these points about having 2 good quarterbacks, obviously, occasionally this becomes a cap issue, right? But if you have 2 guys that you can pay that are playing well, and you have a culture where that works, and under a guy like Orlando Steinauer, I would think that would work. It's that kind of a culture in that locker room. I think, what's the issue? Let Masoli get a little healthier, see what Dane can do. And this is not a position that these guys haven't been in. And this is something in the CFL we see every year. This is a conversation we have all the time. And I think if anything, it creates, we've heard it before, good competition. It'll give Masoli some time to heal up. And I think that works.
We'll find out what the coach does, because that's certainly, as you know, Steve, going to be a hot topic in the city of Hamilton. Let me move this along here. Week 4 in the CFL. Total combined points scored in 3 games, 37, 36, 34. We have all watched and followed the Canadian Football League for years. We have always said, and I don't mean to bring up the comparison, but I will, that it's a more offensive and explosive league than our friends to the south in the National Football League. These scores don't represent that. Steve, what are you seeing so far in terms of offenses and defenses?
I think this was entirely predictable, partly for 2 reasons. The length of time off for key players, the number of key players that didn't return this year, and no preseason games. So it was really hard. Defense is reactionary, and you basically can generally be ahead. Normally at the start of a year anyways, I think you can find defenses are ahead. But I think this has had a little more impact than I would have expected. But I don't think we would have had the same situation last year had they been able to get going, because teams didn't have that whole year off. But this, I think that's really, really showing. It really showed in the timing. I think it even showed with Hamilton. They had Speedy Banks finally open once deep. And Dane Evans isn't quite there yet with the timing of that throw, or that would have been 6 as well.
Brodie, are these games boring to you?
No, absolutely not. That's what football is all about, right? But I do think what Steve was saying, I was pondering this as you were asking the question. I was wondering what you guys were going to say. And I thought, offense is so, how do you practice? How do you take that much time off when you don't have the opportunity to practice at tempo, at pace, right? It's such a different beast than defense. Of course, you could make the same argument, right? But I think offensively, it makes a big difference. I don't find it boring, and I don't think CFL fans do either, even though we know that high-powered long ball offense is what we love about the game, or what many of us love about the game. But to Steve's point, it will change, right? Once these guys get used to being back playing, once they get in the groove, once they've sorted out their offense, and then, of course, physically, right? I mean, we've got to assume these guys were able to maintain some level of strength training, but depending on where you lived and what you had access to, you might not have had the opportunity. Now, your question about offense versus defense, it doesn't really work, but I just think generally, I know you could make the argument these guys are professional athletes, they should be showing up ready to go. But I do think, let's be realistic about what's happened in the last year and a half. And it's going to take time for everyone to get up to speed. And I think whether we like it or not, or whether that's kind of what we expect, that's just the reality of the situation.
Glen, you're at the broadcast booth of these things. You see from your angle, you see many things that we just don't see on the television cut. Are we seeing cohesive offenses? Are we seeing some struggles?
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, I love the defensive games. I mean, I'm a former defensive I'm a former defensive back. So, I think we've become accustomed to, watching an interception and saying it was a mistake by the offense, rather than watching an interception and saying it was a big play made by the defense. And, that's fun to watch too. So, from a broadcast point of view, any game that is a 1-possession game in the fourth quarter, give me that anytime. It doesn't matter to me how many points have been scored. As long as it's a 1-possession game, then we've got a good finish. And I think that's what keeps eyes on the television and fans excited in the stands. Having said that, I do believe, it's just a theory, that offenses require timing and chemistry at a higher level than defenses. I really think that just with good effort and flying to the football, you can overcome mistakes defensively much quicker and easier than you can on offense. You can't, as a receiver, if you're off in your timing with the quarterback, you can't just run faster to make it up. You sometimes it's running at a half speed to find the hole in a zone defense, for instance, that needs to improve for that chemistry to be created between quarterback and receiver. So I think that without a preseason and the shortened camps and the protocols, I think that's affected offenses. a little bit in their timing and chemistry. It'll come, but I think for the next probably couple of weeks, maybe it blows up on Labor Day. But if you've been taking the under all this year, you're winning some money.
You certainly are. It's great that we can freely talk about this right now too. The over, the under, the point spread. It's such a change in our mindset in terms of the game. I mean, we've heard it for years with the National Football League, but I think it's exciting that we can talk about that with the CFL now. Now let's stay with this sort of point situation, this point scoring. I'm going to list off what the Ottawa Redblacks offense has produced in 3 weeks of football: 12 points, 10 points, 16 points. They have 1 win and 2 losses, which you mean with that point production, you would kind of wonder. I think obviously we're talking about the quarterbacks, and I know you guys have done a great job of explaining why the offenses might be behind the defenses in terms of getting in sync. But getting in sync, to me, starts at the quarterback. And Glen, I'll throw this to you. Matt Nichols, we talk about elite quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League, and I'm wondering, is he elite? Why can't he produce more offense around him? Because he has a coach, in my opinion, that is very offensive-minded.
Yeah, I mean, Matt has a winning record. So, I think you start there because, again, we often say with the quarterback that it's about winning. And if they can get, that winning record and get their team in position to take a playoff run, make it in the playoffs, and then take a run to the cup, then you become in that conversation of elite quarterbacks. But in Ottawa right now, I think there's 2 things I'm hearing. One is that protection is an issue, and the other is that they don't have enough around the quarterback in the receiving core to give him enough help. If that's the case, either way, then an athletic quarterback that can buy time with his legs may be the answer. That may be what kickstarts them, because there's 2 ways to beat those issues. Quick game, which protects your O-line, because if you're struggling up front and getting the ball out of your hands quickly, that will help. Or an athletic quarterback that can run around and create. And that's what Dominic Davis is. So I heard Paul LaPolice say it's time that he evaluates everything. I suggested a week ago that Dominic Davis may be an option here to kickstart this offense, not to throw Matt Nichols out with the bathwater, but just to say they need something. They need a spark. Well,
I mean, we've got this situation where we're hearing that the 14-game regular season, Steve, you got to get things done quickly.
Yeah, a slow start in a 14-game season is a lot different than a slow start in an 18-game season. There's no doubt about that. But I think one of the situations in Ottawa, and I think you ever look around the league and how the top better teams are able to combat the shortcomings that Glen has mentioned about Ottawa. One of them is running game. And maybe it's their offensive line, but they haven't really got that established either. So that's a third problem for them as well. I think they're relying way too much on Ryan Davis. He's going to be overcovered. They got to find Daniel Peterman and people like that a little bit more, those secondary and third and fourth receivers. But if you haven't got time to check down because you're getting harassed and you're not mobile, and you're not being able to give it off with any kind of success on first down on the running game, you run into a problem. Hamilton, for instance, ran into that in the first game. But you take a look at the teams that have been doing well; they're establishing that running game. Well, Montreal, when they won, they got good work out of the backfield. Saskatchewan and Winnipeg as well. And those are real good antidotes. It's a third weapon. That means a team can be a lot more, they can be 2-dimensional. Right now, Ottawa is not even 1-dimensional on the offense. Maybe have something on that line as well. I mean, there are a lot of teams in this league with line problems right now. It's disguised by some wins against each other, but there's a lot of offensive line problems right across this league.
Brodie, this team had once William Powell as their running back. They had Greg Ellingson as a guy that was outside. Have they lost too much talent and relying on guys that, that need to learn the game and really get in tune with the quarterback?
Anytime you overhaul a program like they've sort of done, whether deliberately or not, you're going to see issues. Glenn mentioned it earlier. There is something to be said for chemistry. There is something to be said for chemistry when you've had this much time off. And then let's not forget that Matt Nichols had shoulder surgery. I know it was a while ago, but to not be able to play at that game tempo we were talking about with guys that he's used to playing with, that takes a while. And I know how hard he works. I went down to Spokane, Washington with him and worked out. I know the dedication he has, but that doesn't mean that in week 3, week 4, you're like firing the way that you have been with a completely new team. And, also the ups and downs he's had, being with Toronto, being traded, like there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Of course, Matt Nichols is an elite quarterback. I'm a Matt Nichols fan, and he continues to work hard. And I think you're right. The offensive line seems to be an issue. The run game seems to be an issue. And Bubba, you make a good point. I think, anytime you overhaul a system, it might be too easy to just point to the quarterback, even if there are issues there. And we'll leave that to the coaching staff to determine and kind of figure out as they go.
I think one of the most serious things that's going on, I think going into this season and probably will continue to be as a dark cloud over, I think, sports, is the COVID question. This week, only 3 games were played. There should have been 4. The week should have led off with the Toronto Argonauts hosting the Edmonton Elks. Unfortunately, the Elks have run into, I think, what I would call serious COVID issues and forced the CFL to postpone the game. Now, I know there are a number of rules and a number of ways to get in and around this. They would like to get the game in. I think we all know that. But with the compressed schedule, guys, I don't know how this is going to be done. Glen, is it time to just award the Argonauts a victory?
Well, I think, first of all, with the Elks, that we wish and hope that they all recover from this. I think this is sort of lost in this discussion that 14 players, 13 players, or staff got COVID, and we hope for a quick recovery for all of them first. But when you're talking about the logistics of what do we do now, we have to strengthen protocols. We have to get on top of this. I think it's in everyone's best interest to try and reschedule the game because it did happen so early in the season. But the league, in my opinion, needs to make sure that if there's going to be a competitive disadvantage anywhere, it's the Elks that have to face it, not the Argos, if that can be possibly done. And the message has to be a strong one from now on moving forward, that protocols are going to be strengthened, vaccinations are going to be pushed. And if you're not vaccinated, you still have that personal choice, but there's going to be many, many hoops for you to jump through on a daily basis to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because the game is in jeopardy here, not just a team or the player. This is our league and the game continuing, and we got to make sure it doesn't happen again.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's a situation that I don't think you have to make a decision today, but I think you've got to do it for exactly what Glen was just saying, an expediency standpoint, so that you put a lot more pressure on everybody else all the time. And we don't have this happen again soon. So you need to make that decision fairly soon. And you can make that. I mean, we're going to know what the scheduling issues are. They know what they are, who can play where, when. And so I don't think there's much that should be able to delay that. And so I would say sometime in the next week or so, to have the effect that the forfeiture rule is meant to have, which is to put pressure on the players the teams, and therefore the players themselves to make sure that they comply. And it's not much of a rule if there's a competitive advantage that goes the other way. So this game can never be played in Edmonton. The rescheduled game cannot be played in Edmonton. If it can't be played in Toronto, that's not Toronto's fault. I'm sure it can be played, but a lot has to do with who's playing when and the number of days between games. But you should be able to know that within a few days. And I would say by the end of Labor Day, don't shadow Labor Day with this, but right after Labor Day, make that decision.
Brodie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a scary situation, right? And I go back to what Glen says. I mean, you just think of everyone in these positions and thinking about this question, you feel for everyone. You feel for guys who did the right thing and got vaccinated, and now they're testing positive, and the ramifications on their families and the people around them. The whole thing is so sad and so scary. Is it a perfect solution? know. And that's, I think, what's so frustrating is we could talk for 40 minutes, an hour alone about this topic and try and come up with what is the right thing. We're sports fans. We want to see this played out on the field. It feels deeply unfair for something just to, for a team to be awarded a win, but it should happen, right? If that is the only way. But yeah, you want to see this played out on the field. The issue is, which we've already addressed, is the condensed schedule and the fact that the Grey Cup is already in December. I'm sure there was no, from the league office, maybe there could have been, I'm sure they did discuss an opportunity to add in some wiggle room for these games to be held throughout the season. But with that December Grey Cup, I'm sure that wasn't really an option. So I agree with Steve too. It would be great to see it happen before Labor Day. It would be nice to kind of move beyond this, but there's just no perfect solution, is there? Like I wish we had a suggestion. I wish we had a great. I don't have it, and I'm just thankful we have football back. And I think I hope this doesn't happen again this season, but it might, and so we should be prepared for that. And and just kind of be prepared to be happy to have football back.
Steve Brodie and myself. Sorry, we've all been in locker rooms, and Glen, you played the game. And I asked David Sanchez this question last week, and I'm going to ask you. The issue of COVID, the issue of vaccination, is that something that can tear apart a locker room?
Absolutely could, but it could also galvanize you. It could also bring you together. And, I think we, while still respecting everyone's personal choices when it comes to their medical decisions, we can respect that, but this is the commitment that you have to make for your teammates, for the game you want to play, and the game that you appreciate more now, having missed an entire year. I think all of that is part of this equation. And I will say, quite frankly, it would be a red flag for me if a player was choosing to make the individual choice instead of what's best for the team in a lot of different, ways. That's a red flag. So yeah, it could definitely pull teams apart, but it can also galvanize you. I think we strengthen protocols. I think we make it as tough as we can. Listen, every player had the option to opt out. If they didn't want to live with the consequences of this and the protocols, they could opt out. Brendan Labatt did it in Saskatchewan, just because of protocols. So now you've made the choice to make the team bigger than you. So that means you got to get vaccinated, or you got to be tested every single day, and you cannot leave your apartment while you're here in Canada playing football.
And we're coming up to a situation where even charter flights might be affected by this, Glen.
Yeah. Right.
We thought charter flights would be some way around this, where you could have non-vaccinated and vaccinated with it, but it may be, we'll see what exactly it is when the regulations do come down, that suddenly this becomes even more serious, particularly in the West. Hamilton, for instance, would really, if they let's say they had a few players that weren't vaccinated, they could, for all but one game for the rest of the time now, take either a train or a bus to the rest of the games. The West, almost every game is an air flight game. So if it affects the charter, that's really going to have a divisive. Not only it's going to have a really competitive problem, a situation if a person can't travel. How do you get somebody in? Are there enough players on the practice roster to move somebody into that type of thing? This isn't just a football issue. This happens in society all of the time, where you have to sometimes measure the common good above individual rights and responsibilities and desires. And so it would almost be unfair to limit this to just a locker room argument, because this goes on in society all the time. It's why we have courts to put one principle ahead of the other. And I think it's pretty clear what that principle has to be when there's something so deadly or potentially deadly as COVID out there. That has to be the common good. Or
to Glen's point, you opt out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you were given the option, you were given the choice, if that's the choice you want to make, common good, or maybe it's not for you. And otherwise, now you're putting teams and management and the league in a position to have to make these choices, knowing full well, you should expect the unexpected when it comes to COVID. And so if this is going to affect charter flights, shocker. like, expect the unexpected. This is our new reality, don't expect to ever get comfortable in any certain way.
Well, folks, I mean, this has been an outstanding chat. And of course, we take a serious conversation like COVID and the Canadian Football League and what's going on. And we look forward to arguably the greatest weekend in CFL, and that is the Labor Day weekend. And we all look forward to it. Glen, we certainly look forward to hearing you on the broadcast. Milty, big game at Tim Hortons Field, the home opener for the Ticats. And Brodie, of course, we look forward to your input on the CFL on TSN. It's been an outstanding chat. This is the CFL This Week. We thank you, Brodie. We thank you, Glen. And we thank you, Milty, for joining us. And we'll talk next week. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Got to catch a flight.